Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got an incredible stack of sources in front of us today, taking us deep into a world we often overlook, the hidden lives of plants.
That's right. We're talking about some truly eye-opening research. It's fundamentally challenging our traditional view of plants as just passive background elements.
Yeah, just sort of there. So our mission with this deep dive is to explore these latest findings, things that show plants doing things we thought maybe only animals could do, sensing, communicating, maybe even remembering.
Exactly. And what do these insights mean for how we understand the living world around us? And importantly, why should you care?
Right. We'll look at some surprising discoveries, touch on areas where scientists are still actively debating, and try to get to the heart of why this research is sparking so much excitement and, well, sometimes controversy too.
Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, so let's jump right in. For most of history, we've kind of seen plants as pretty simple, right? They stand there, they photosynthesize, maybe they lean towards the sun.
A very static view.
But it turns out that view is vastly incomplete. Way back in 1878, a scientist named Claude Bernard noticed something amazing. Plants react to anesthetics.
Just like animals do. Yes, Bernard's observation was a really provocative starting point, even back then.
How so? What did he see?
Well, he found anesthetics made plants lose responsiveness, inhibited their movement, similar to how they induce unconsciousness in humans.
Wow, okay.
And this led him to suggest that maybe plants and animals share a, quote, common biological essence.
Huh. And fast forward to today, some researchers are actually using this very idea, the fact that anesthetics affect plants, to sort of fuel the debate about whether plants might have some form of consciousness themselves.
That's definitely part of the conversation now, the idea of plant neurobiology. And yeah, consciousness has certainly captured the public imagination.
But what does consciousness even mean in this context?
Well, if we define it broadly, like a capacity for experience or sensation, it opens up this fascinating, though difficult, question for plants.
But it sounds like a really controversial area in science.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. Comparing plant responses to, say, human pain, or talking about talking trees, it can easily sound like anthropomorphism, right? Projecting human traits onto them.
Right. You can see why that might be problematic.
And historically, that kind of thinking has sometimes made this whole subject a bit taboo in some scientific circles. You just couldn't ask a plant about its subjective experience.
Okay, so maybe we set aside the consciousness debate for a moment.
Right, because even without settling that, the sources make it abundantly clear that plants sense and respond in incredibly sophisticated ways.
Like what?
Well, they detect light, gravity, temperature, touch, chemicals. They're essentially acutely aware of their environment, and they do this using complex chemical and electrical signaling.
Okay, give some examples. The sources had some amazing ones.
Oh yeah, like that familiar smell when you cut grass.
That fresh-cut lawn smell.
Sources describe it as a burst of volatile chemicals. Essentially, it's a chemical distress call.
A distress call? What for?
It can attract insects that might prey on whatever is eating the grass. It's like calling for bodyguards.
That is wild. Okay, what else?
Or consider this. A study from the University of Missouri found plants can detect the specific vibrations of a caterpillar chewing on a leaf.
You're kidding. Just the vibrations.
Just the vibrations. And they respond by cranking up their chemical defenses. They can literally sense who is attacking them just by the chewing pattern.
Okay, my mind is slightly blown already.
And there's more. Another study, this one out of Tel Aviv University, even found plants emit ultrasonic sounds when they're stressed, like from lack of water.
Ultrasonic sounds,
Yeah.
like actual noises.
Yeah, clicks or pops, apparently. Though linking these sounds to screams, as some headlines did, is definitely where that anthropomorphism critique comes in again. We have to be careful with the language.
Right, fair enough. But the point is, the plant is reacting.
Exactly. Internally and externally to stress. When a leaf is damaged, cells within the plant send signals, chemical and electrical, to other parts, getting them ready to defend and repair. It's almost like an internal warning system.
And this ties back to the anesthetics thing.
It does, potentially. Remember that anesthetic observation?
Yeah.
Well, anesthetics can disrupt specific chemical signals, like those involving a hormone called jasminate, which plants use for long-distance communication within themselves. This disruption affects coordinated responses, drawing a debated parallel to how anesthetics disrupt integrated information processing in our own brains. It's suggestive, but still debated.
Okay, so the takeaway here is, the next time you walk past a bush or mow your lawn,
Yeah.
you might think differently, knowing there's this whole complex world of sensing and responding happening right under your nose.
Or leaves.
Precisely. It's a much more dynamic picture than we usually imagine.
Okay, so if they can sense and respond like that, does that mean they can remember? This is where it gets even more, well, mind-bending for me. Right. How can plants have memory if they don't have anything, like a brain or neurons or, a hippocampus?
Exactly. No brain cells.
So researchers approach it functionally. They define plant memory not like us recalling a birthday,
Okay.
but more like lasting changes in behavior or physiology based on past experiences. It's about adapting based on what happened before.
And the sources point to several ways plants seem to remember things, at least within their own lifetime.
Yeah.
There was something called molecular memory.
Yes, that's one mechanism being explored. This involves molecules within the plant cells temporarily organizing themselves in response to conditions.
How does that work? Like data storage?
Think of it less like a computer hard drive and more like molecules clumping together in temporary droplets inside the cell. Liquid phase separation, technically.
Okay.
This can store information for a short while, like helping plants remember short-term temperature changes through specific proteins. It's a reversible kind of memory, sort of like RAM, maybe?
Interesting analogy. But then there's a more stable form you mentioned, epigenetic memory. That sounds important.
It is. This is huge. Environmental stress or experiences like prolonged cold or drought or even maybe an attack can actually leave enduring marks on a plant's DNA, or more often on the proteins associated with it.
Wait, it changes the DNA.
Not the sequence itself, no, that stays the same. But these epigenetic marks act like little switches or volume knobs. They control which genes are turned on or off or how strongly they're expressed.
I see, like annotations on the genetic code.
Kind of, and these changes can persist over time and influence the plant's traits, its phenotype.
And there was a classic example of this with flowering.
Yes, vernalization. How certain plants like the little lab workhorse Arabidopsis remember winter.
Right, so they don't flower too early.
Exactly. To ensure they only flower after the cold is safely over, they use epigenetic marks to essentially silence a gene that prevents flowering. The cold adds these specific marks.
Like a little tag.
Yeah, a molecular tag. And that tag is maintained even after temperatures rise. It's like a cellular memory switch, confirming the plant has experienced winter before it allows itself to flower. Pretty clever.
That is clever. And this memory can vary.
Sources mention that annual plants, which only live one season, might have more irreversible versions of this cold memory.
Makes sense.
Compared to perennials, which live for years, their memory might need to be more adaptable or reversible.
Okay. And there was also something about remembering attacks, like immunity.
Yeah, sort of like immune system priming. If a plant has been attacked by a pathogen or herbivore once, it can often prime its defenses, meaning it reacts more strongly and quickly if it encounters the same threat again. It's remembered the attacker in a way.
And how does it do that?
Various cellular mechanisms are involved, and potentially epigenetic changes at specific gene locations could play a role there too, locking in that readiness.
So plant memory isn't about recalling events like we do. It's more fundamental.
Exactly. It's about biological processes that allow past conditions, cold, stress, attack, to physically or chemically alter the plant's state in a way that influences its future growth and survival. And maybe even its offsprings, but we'll get to that.
Okay, sensing, responding, remembering. Now let's head underground. The Wood Wide Web. This sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does, doesn't it? It's perhaps one of the most well-known concepts from this field, even if the term itself is, a popular analogy.
So what is it, technically?
It refers to common mycorrhizal networks, or CMNs, basically vast underground networks formed by a symbiotic relationship between plant roots and certain types of fungi.
Symbiotic, meaning they both benefit?
Correct. The fungal threads, called hyphae, act like tiny pipelines, connecting multiple plants, sometimes the same species, sometimes different species across the soil.
Wow, connecting different species.
Yeah. The fungi get sugars, energy, from the plant's photosynthesis. And in return, they help the plants access water and crucial nutrients, like phosphorus and nitrogen, from the soil that their own roots maybe can't reach easily.
So it's a trade.
It's a trade. But the sources suggest these networks might be conduits for much more than just basic resources.
Like what else?
Well, minerals, obviously, water. Sugars and carbon, definitely. But maybe also hormones and signaling molecules, sometimes referred to as infochemicals.
Infochemicals, right. Like information chemicals.
That's the idea, chemicals carrying some kind of message or signal between plants.
And what's the purpose these transfers might serve? Why share?
Well, it could be straightforward resource sharing. For instance, carbon moving from a tree in full sun to a shaded seedling that's struggling.
Ah, okay. Helping the little ones.
Or water moving from deep-rooted trees up to shallower-rooted plants during dry spells. Something called hydraulic redistribution, driven by, supply and demand gradients.
Okay, that makes sense. But the infochemicals part.
That's where it gets really intriguing. There's evidence suggesting these networks might facilitate communication, particularly about threats.
Like the distress calls, but underground.
Kind of. A plant under attack by insects or pathogens might send signals through the network, essentially warning its connected neighbors.
Warning them so they can prepare.
Exactly. Priming them, getting them to ramp up their own chemical defenses before the attackers even reach them.
Imagine that. An early warning system running through the soil.
Right. The networks could also help new seedlings get established, especially in tough, stressful environments. And then there's the more complex idea of older established trees, sometimes called mother trees in popular accounts, potentially transferring resources and maybe even information to younger seedlings, maybe their own offspring.
That sounds almost nurturing.
Well, nurturing is an anthropomorphic term, but the idea of facilitation is there. Now, it's really important to stress here. While the existence of these networks and basic resource transfer is pretty solid science, the extent and universality of things like routine warning signal transfer or large-scale altruistic resource sharing, that's still an area of active research and some significant debate.
Why the debate? It sounds so compelling.
It is compelling, but it's technically really challenging to design experiments that definitively prove transfer happened through the fungal network and not, say, through roots touching directly or just chemicals diffusing through the soil water.
Ah, okay. Isolating the pathway is hard.
Very hard. And some of the more exciting claims, like widespread warning signals, are sometimes based on, well, maybe a smaller number of studies, perhaps done in less natural settings like greenhouses. So there's a need for more research and caution about overinterpretation.
So scientists are being careful not to jump to conclusions or use language that's too human-like.
Exactly. Avoiding those anthropomorphic traps is key. But, it's striking to compare this scientific exploration with the knowledge systems of many indigenous cultures.
Also,
Well, particularly those in forest environments, like the Pacific Northwest, many indigenous worldviews developed over thousands of years of intimate observation and stewardship really emphasize the deep connection and interdependence within forests. There's a kind of resonance there with some of these scientific findings about networks and communication.
that's a really interesting point. A different way of knowing, arriving at similar ideas.
Yeah. And looking ahead, researchers are now using tools like AI and a complex computer modeling to try and simulate and understand how these networks function on a larger scale.
And that could help with forestry.
Potentially, yes. It could eventually inform how we manage forests and ecosystems more sustainably, perhaps considering these connections.
Okay, so beyond the sensing, the memory, the underground networks, the source has also touched on other, maybe even more speculative possibilities for how plants perceive the world.
Yeah, just briefly. Things like plant bioacoustics, which we touched on with the stress sounds. But going beyond just reacting to vibrations, there's research exploring whether plants might emit their own sounds more routinely, perhaps those ultrasonic clicks or snaps.
Still very early days on that, I imagine.
Oh, very. And then there was even the idea of something akin to seeing.
Seeing. How could a plant see?
Well, one example cited is a vine that can apparently adjust its growth form to mimic the leaves of the plant it's climbing on. Even plastic artificial leaves, how does it know?
Huh. That's bizarre.
And other research looks at special lens-shaped cells in the cuticle, the outer layer of some plants, that seem to focus light. Now, that might be purely to optimize photosynthesis,
Okay.
but it does raise questions about the sophistication of light perception, maybe beyond just detecting direction and intensity.
So when you put all these abilities together, the sensing, the responding, the remembering, the communicating through networks, maybe even these other perceptions, it all feeds into this bigger, perhaps more philosophical conversation around plant intelligence and plant agency, right?
Absolutely. It's part of a wider movement in academic circles, sometimes called the vegetal turn.
The vegetal turn.
Yeah, it's about taking plants seriously, not just as biological objects or resources, but as complex, active participants in their world. It's bridging science, philosophy, and, as we mentioned, sometimes connecting with ancient wisdom traditions.
And it really challenges how we categorize life, doesn't it?
It does. We seem comfortable thinking about intelligence in terms of brains and nervous systems like ours, or even in AI, which is often modeled on our structures.
Right.
It seems harder for us to wrap our heads around the idea that intelligence, or something like it, could exist in completely different forms without those familiar components,
Right.
based on chemical networks maybe, or electrical signals in tissues.
So this field pushes us to maybe think less about a rigid hierarchy, like humans at the top, then animals, then plants way down below.
Perhaps. Or at least to consider a spectrum, or maybe a web, of incredibly complex life forms interacting in ways we're only just beginning to understand. It challenges our sense of being unique, maybe, or at the pinnacle.
And for you, the listener, what's the value in all this?
Well, I think this deep dive really opens up entirely new ways of looking at the green world around you. It reveals in an unexpected depth a dynamic life happening in organisms we often dismiss as simple or passive.
And it could have real-world implications.
Potentially, yes. For how we grow food, how we manage forests, how we approach conservation, maybe even our ethical considerations towards the non-animal life we share the planet with.
Okay, so we started with that historical curiosity plants reacting to anesthetics way back when. We explored how they use chemical signals as distress calls, how they can sense caterpillar vibrations.
Delved into the mechanisms behind molecular and epigenetic memory, that ability to change based on past conditions.
And journeyed into the complex and sometimes debated world of those underground fungal networks, the Wood Wide Web.
We've really seen how plants sense, respond, remember, and communicate in ways that honestly compel us to rethink our traditional definitions of life and maybe even intelligence.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If plants can remember past conditions, if they can communicate through complex networks right under your feet, how does that change your perception